Y'all know what's going on. It's time for another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Bacon. Welcome to the show, y'all. There's a code in the streets, or at least there used to be, an unwritten set of laws that were more powerful than anything a judge could hand down. Loyalty was the currency, silence was the shield, and betrayal. Betrayal was a sin so deep, it was paid for in blood. This is a story about the death of that code, about an old king and the young prince who stabbed him in the back. It's about the final betrayal. The king was a man named Silas. He was an old school OG, a dinosaur from a different era. He didn't have flashy cars or a big entourage. He had a quiet and absolute power. He had been running his side of the city for 30 years, and he did it with a whisper, not a shout. His reputation was his weapon, and his word was his bomb. He was a man of the old code, and he had a son, not by blood, but by the streets. A kid named Nico. Silas had found him when he was just a boy, a street orphan, smart and hungry, with a survivor's instinct in his eyes. Silas saw a reflection of his own youth in him, and he took him in. He raised him, taught him the game, and not just the violence, the business, the politics. He taught him the code. Nico was a quick study. He was smart, ambitious, and fiercely loyal to the man who had saved him. He became Silas's right-hand man, his heir apparent. Their bond was legendary on the streets. A father and a son bound together by a shared history and a criminal enterprise. Their operation was a well-oiled machine. They moved in the shadow, their hands in everything from drugs to gambling to real estate. They were untouchable, protected by a wall of silence and a network of loyalty that Silas had built over a lifetime. But the world was changing. The old code was dying and a new generation was coming up, a generation that valued money over loyalty and self-preservation over everything else. And Silas, in his old school wisdom, didn't see it coming. He didn't see the serpent that he had raised in his own house. The feds had been trying to get Silas for years, but they could never make a case stick. The wall of silence was too thick. So they started a new kind of war, a RICO investigation. They started squeezing the operation from the bottom up, arresting low-level dealers, runners, offering them deals, trying to find a crack in the wall. Silas wasn't worried. He had faith in his men, in the code. But Nico started to get nervous. He was young. He didn't have the same faith in the old ways. He saw the world in a different way, as a game of survival. And he was determined to be the last man standing. The pressure mounted and the feds were getting closer. One of Silas's top lieutenants was arrested, and the word on the street was he was talking. Silas called a meeting. His face was a mask of calm, but his eyes were hard. The code is being tested, he said to his inner circle, and we will not break. He looked at Nico, his eyes full of a father's trust. You are the future of this family, son. You have to hold the line. Nico nodded, his face a perfect mask of loyalty. I won't let you down, Pops, he said. But in his heart, a different calculation was being made, a cold and brutal calculation of risk and reward. The old king's reign was coming to an end, and the young prince was starting to think about the crown. The final betrayal was not a single, sudden act. It was a slow, quiet, and deadly shift in the heart of a man who had been taught the code and who was now deciding to rewrite it in his own selfish and devastating image. The federal pressure was a slow, suffocating python. Every week, another arrest, another piece of the empire crumbling. Silas remained a rock, his faith in the code unwavering, and he told his men to stay strong, to stay silent. But the world had changed. The code was a relic from a bygone era. The new generation of hustlers, they didn't believe in loyalty, and they believed in deals. Nico saw the writing on the wall. He saw the empire that Silas had built over a lifetime being dismantled piece by piece, and he started to think about his own future. He wasn't going down with the ship. He was too smart, too ambitious for that. He started to move in the shadows. He had quiet conversations with some of the younger members of the crew, the ones who, like him, saw the game as a business, not a family. He started to build his own power base, a silent secret coup in the heart of his father's kingdom. Silas, in his blind trust, didn't see it. He saw Nico's ambition as a reflection of his own. He saw his ruthlessness as a necessary tool of the trade. He was grooming his heir, not knowing that his heir was sharpening the knife that would one day find a home in his own back. The feds, in their methodical way, were getting closer to the top. They knew that the only way to get Silas was to flip someone in his inner circle, and their sights were set on the young prince, Nico. They started to squeeze him. They put surveillance on him, tracked his movements, his phone calls. They built a case against him that was as strong as the one they were building against Silas. They were setting a trap. And Nico, in his own ambition, was walking right into it. The arrest came on a cold, gray morning. They took them both down at the same time in separate locations. Silas was at his daughter's house playing with his grandkids. Nico was at his fancy downtown apartment with a new girl. The message was clear. No one is untouchable. They were put in separate interrogation rooms at the federal building. Silas was a stone wall. He just sat there silent, his face a mask of bored indifference. He knew the code. He would die by the code. But Nico was different. He was a product of a new era, an era of self-preservation, of me first. The federal agent who interrogated him was a master psychologist. He didn't threaten, he seduced. He laid out two futures for Nico. One was a life sentence in a supermax facility, a slow death in a concrete box. The other was a new life, a new name, a new city, a clean slate. Witness protection, all he had to do was give them the one thing they wanted, Silas. He's an old man, Nico, the agent said, his voice a smooth, reasonable purr. His time is over. But you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't throw it away for a man who is already a ghost. The agent laid a file on the table. It was the case against Silas, and it was airtight. Nico saw the years of his own life, of his mentor's life, laid out in black and white. He saw the end of the road, and in that moment, the code, the loyalty, the love he had for the man who had raised him, it all just evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard, and brutal calculation of his own survival. He had been raised to be a prince, but he was about to become a traitor. The final betrayal was not a moment of passion. It was a business decision. And in that quiet, sterile interrogation room, Nico, the son, the heir, the protege, made the choice that would not only destroy his father, but would also, in the end, destroy himself. The decision to flip was a quiet one, made in the sterile silence of an interrogation room. But the consequences were a deafening explosion that shattered an empire. Nico talked. For 3 days, he sat with the federal agents and he laid out the entire history of Silas's operation. The names, the dates, the locations, the accounts. He was a walking, talking encyclopedia of his father's sins, and he gave them everything. He justified it to himself, of course. He told himself that Silas was already done, that the feds had him anyway. He told himself that he was just saving his own life. But deep down in the quiet and now permanently empty space where his soul used to be, he knew the truth. He was a rat. The one thing, the only thing that the code of his world forbade. He had betrayed the man who had saved him, who had raised him, who had loved him like a son. Silas sat in his cell, unaware of the betrayal that was unfolding, and he was confident, and he knew the feds had a weak case. It was all circumstantial. As long as Nico stayed silent, he would walk. He had absolute faith in the code In the loyalty he had built his life on, it was a faith that was about to be brutally and fatally misplaced. The trial was a spectacle. The feds had built a RICO case so massive, so detailed, it was a monument to their own patience and diligence. And the star witness, the man who was going to tie it all together, was Nico. The day he took the stand, the courtroom was silent. Silas sat at the defendant's table, his face a mask of stone. He looked at Nico as he walked to the witness stand, and for a moment his eyes were filled not with anger, but with a deep and profound confusion. He couldn't understand. This was his son. Nico didn't look at him. He just stared straight ahead at the prosecutor, his face a practiced mask of neutral sincerity. And then he started to talk. And with every word, he dismantled his father's world, brick by bloody brick. He told them everything. The drug deals, the money laundering, the violence. He gave them the details that only someone on the inside would know. He was a masterful witness, calm, credible, and utterly devastating. He was a son testifying against his father, and in doing so, he was signing his own death warrant in the world he came from and his own life sentence in the quiet, lonely hell of his own conscience. As he spoke, Silas just sat there, his face slowly turning from confusion to a cold, hard, and absolute understanding. The code was dead, and his own son was the one who had killed it. The betrayal was complete. And in that silent and devastating moment of truth, Silas knew that his life, as he knew it, was over. He had been a king, but he had been dethroned not by a rival, not by the police, but by the one person he had thought he could trust with his life, his own and only son. The jury was out for less than a day. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, guilty on all counts. The king was dead. The judge sentenced Silas to life in a federal supermax facility. No parole, it was a death sentence. As they led him away in chains, he looked at Nico one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, just a profound and bottomless emptiness. The look of a man who had not just lost his freedom, but his faith in the world itself. Nico was whisked away by the federal marshals, a ghost disappearing into the witness protection program. He had his deal. He had his freedom. But he had lost everything else. His name, his past, his soul. He was a man without a history, a traitor who would spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, haunted by the ghost of the father he had betrayed. And this story, the story of the final betrayal, it's a story about the death of a certain kind of world, the world of the old school gangster, the world of the code. Silas was a dinosaur, a man who believed in loyalty in a world that had moved on. And Nico was the new breed, the breed that saw the game not as a matter of honor, but as a matter of profit and loss. And in their final tragic confrontation, the new world had devoured the old. But it's also a story about a deeper, more personal kind of betrayal. The betrayal of a father by a son. Silas had given Nico everything, a home, a name, a purpose, and Nico had taken it all, and he had used it to destroy him. It makes you wonder, what is loyalty? Is it a code, a set of rules, or is it something deeper? Something that can't be bought or sold or traded for a deal? Silas had believed in the code, and it had failed him. Nico had believed in nothing but himself, and he had won in a way. But what kind of victory is it? To be free in a world where you are completely and utterly alone? That's a question that Nico would have a lifetime to answer in the quiet, lonely, and haunted nights of his new and empty life. The king was in a cage, and the prince was in a different one, a prison of his own, making a prison from which there is no escape. Years later, I saw Silas. He was in the same federal pen I was in for a short time. He was an old man, a ghost shuffling through the yard, The power, the aura, it was all gone. He was just another lifer doing his time, waiting to die. He kept to himself, didn't talk much. But sometimes you'd see him sitting alone at a table in the chow hall, just staring into space, and you knew what he was seeing. The ghost of the son he had loved, the son who had betrayed him. And Nico, I heard stories about him sometimes through the grapevine. He was living somewhere in the Midwest with a new name, a new face. He was a successful businessman, they said, but he was a man who lived in a fortress of his own making, with cameras, with security, with a constant gnawing fear. He had escaped the cage, but he had never escaped the game. And in this story, it's a hard one because it shows you that there are no happy endings in this life. There are just endings. Silas's story ended in a cage of concrete and steel. Nico's story ended in a cage of fear and regret. Two men, a father and a son, both of them prisoners of the same brutal and unforgiving game. And it's a reminder that the code of the streets, the one that talks about loyalty and honor, it's a beautiful lie. In the end, it's every man for himself. And the only thing that's real is the choices you make and the ghosts you have to live with. Silas had chosen loyalty, and it had gotten him a life sentence. Nico had chosen betrayal, and it had gotten him a life of lonely and paranoid freedom. Who made the right choice? That's a question I can't answer. All I know is they both lost. The moment they stepped into the game, they lost. And the only winner, as always, was the game itself. A game that has been chewing up fathers and sons since the beginning of time, and a game that shows no signs of stopping. This has been another episode of Doing Time with Joe. I'm your host, Joe Baker, and I say peace, y'all.